Terry's making a granddaughter runs. All of y'all keep an eye on your phones to make sure I don't miss something. We're sitting on ready.
Sitting on ready.
Good morning, everybody. We're glad that you're here. We're going to continue to study in the Gospel of Luke today. We're going to be in the 18th chapter of Luke today. Continue to pray for Joan Smith. She's still seeing her doctor. She's being prescribed some new medications. She has some more meetings with our doctors this week and be getting various test results. And she's very concerned. It's looking into some serious things. Continue to pray for Betsy Stevenson. Of course, Donna Serta is always on our prayer list. Also, when Barbara left church last Sunday, she had received a request of prayer for her nephew, John Bridges. He's struggling with the coronavirus. Yesterday was Ann Sanders' birthday, and can always pray daily for she and JL. We're going to sing happy birthday to her in just a little while. There are those who are receiving their vaccines and so forth. There are some I know in our church who have already received one dose and are just in line for the next. Some are anticipating their first inoculation. I guess it's not an inoculation, it's a vaccination, but Terry and I are still riding on the Regeneron infusion, and then we'll get in line. There are those in our church, among our church, who, as I said, are receiving the vaccine, and that may give them some more freedom and some ability to get out and go and to have more contact. But right now, things are still a little sketchy. Continue to pray for Patricia Hood's sister. We have two other families. Of course, continue to pray for the Buell family. I just saw Addison and Avery come in. They drove themselves. Well, they're just going to have to be doing more and more of on their own and for themselves as this new baby requires extra attention. But it'll be all right. We're glad that they're here this morning. And Harper is doing everything she can, I think, to kind of get headed in this direction. Pray for Austin and Miriam, and also continue to pray for Pam and Murad and the boys out in Las Vegas. Baby's on the way. I sent out a thank you in various ways, but primarily on our social media. The church grounds just look beautiful. So be sure to thank Ronnie Reeves for his hard work in that. If you go anywhere in here in the church, you'll see the indoors. Henry and Linda Crow, better known as Linda and Henry Crow, have everything in order and everything looks great. It was a little chilly last Sunday, and we were doing everything we could to warm it up. We didn't have, you are a hardy group, and evidently brought a shawl or a wrap or something. We had everything just rumbling and roaring, and then we found out, Monday I think, began to find out that someone had an automobile accident in front of our church, took out our gas main at the road, and the only reason it got 2 or 3 degrees warmer last Sunday was because of the sunshine outside. So it's nice and toasty in here, so you can just lay down and just go to sleep if you want to. So we didn't hear about that. I guess it was our utilities company was trying valiantly in various electronic ways to get in touch with us because they needed to get. You just can't turn gas on. You know, you can't just come out and just turn it on. There's no telling what may happen. All pilot lights have to be lit, and the different kinds of valves have to be cleared, and air has to be, you know, and so they had to contact us. So we need to take care of this. Now, electricity often, as far as I know, you just turn it on, there it is. I guess there are probably some considerations for that as well. But we're moving along. It took us 13 sessions to get through the last quarterly. We're working today on part 15. Today is March the 21st, and we're looking at today. And I've kind of changed gears. I thought, well, we need to cover this chapter or this and that chapter, and so I'm finding that the lessons were getting longer, and I was not able to get as deep as I'd like. So what I've been doing is more or less what the quarterly does, is to zoom in or focus on a passage. And so we're at Luke 18, and we're going to look at a very important story that Jesus told that really was a parable, but it was something that he told because about two people. That was really not about two people. It was about two kinds of people. And I had mentioned that Matthew is he was very meticulous about including a lot of Jesus' name calling. Jesus called the Pharisees and scribes and religious leaders a lot of ugly names Avery would not have approved at all. But Luke chose not to include most of those, but he does include this story right here, which is very damning. Let's look at it and just let you see for yourself. Here Luke says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. I'm writing a book right now. I guess I could probably say I'm maybe about halfway finished with it. I'm going along about 36 to 40 pages, but it's entitled Getting in the Groove. It's a phrase that some members of my family have picked up from me. I started using it many years ago, but when I was a teenager, I liked the word groovy. And I guess I still use it to the consternation of many employees that work for the government. Because many of them are young and they don't know what groovy is. So I describe, the introduction of the book talks about how a record works. It has a diamond point needle, and it rests on a floating arm, and that arm rests on a disc that has grooves cut into it. They've used ceramic, clay, wood, wax. I think wax was what Alexander Graham Bell first used. Wax discs. I can see, if I was sitting there in Alexander, he would say, I know, wax. And I'd say, no. But I don't think even in his time that he may have not even known what vinyl was. I'm not sure it had been invented. But the needle touches that groove, and inside that groove are irregularities, skips and stops, breaks, things that make that needle clicks on. It makes it make a sound, and it's not just a sound, and it's not just noise, but it's a recorded voice or music. And so in my day, people began to describe things that worked properly or that were pleasurable or things that were enjoyable, things that worked the way they were supposed to work as being groovy. So, talked about being in the groove. Another chapter in the book is called Under the Spout, where the glory comes out. And I had to stop after 5 or 6 chapters and say, now, I need you to understand that this book is not about record players, and there really is not a hand crank somewhere where you can go and pump out the goodness of God. I said, this, one of Jesus' favorite ways for teaching truth was the parable. And I said, no, I'm not in Jesus' league and not comparing myself to Jesus at all. But I said, I need to, don't say this is a book about record players and nobody even has any anymore. I said, no, it's not a, Jesus spoke about bread and water and about rivers and the sea. He talked about sons and daughters, and he talked about rain, about building houses on rock or on sand. And I said, you know, there was a lot of people that said, you've been to hear Jesus? Yeah, he just talked about bread. A number of years ago, when my son was first starting out in showbiz, he was working the concession stand, and a disgruntled customer came back and threw a pretzel. It was kind of wrapped in wax paper. Threw one of those large pretzels just on the counter. She says, I want my money back for this. And he says, well, is something wrong with it? She says, it just tastes like bread. It just tastes like bread. Just tastes like bread. Actually, it's got a lot of salt on it too, which Terry would really like. It's a really super salt, but it really is not palatable in my mind unless you dip it into some kind of sauce like mustard. Anyway, what did Jesus talk about? He talked about a boy who ran away from home. You know, I didn't. You know, a lot of people it was just going right over their head. Here he's talking about 2 men. And he talks about people who were confident of their own righteousness. Now, righteousness, or to be righteous, seems to be a very formal or religious word. When I think of the word righteous or righteousness in the Bible anywhere, I always think of the first place where I probably saw it used was in the 23rd Psalm, where the psalmist says, the Lord is my shepherd. And we might say this way. He puts the emphasis on the Lord, but he could say, if he wanted to emphasize himself, I am the Lord's sheep. I'm a sheep. The Lord is my shepherd. And then he said, only a few verses or phrases later, he leads me in paths of righteousness. I remember the first sheep I ever saw in my entire life. We don't have a lot of them in Alabama. But when we were growing up and our dad was a used car dealer, we had used cars too. My brother and I, we had used cars, which means they required a lot of maintenance and fixing, which was good because we both learned a lot about cars during that time, how to fix things. But there was like a gold mine right there in our own little town in Flint. We just called it a junkyard. I guess they called it a salvage yard later on, parts salvage. But the owner of that junkyard, he had some junkyard dogs, but more than anything, he had junkyard sheep. And they would keep the grass from just taking over everything. And they were gnarly looking, and they never cared for them. And probably wasn't a good thing to be a sheep there at the salvage yard. I don't know if I ever looked at any one of those sheep and said, now there's a righteous sheep right there. Or that's an unrighteous sheep. You see, he leads me in paths of righteousness. Now, anybody who just looks at that, he's talking about a shepherd and sheep. And you know that what he's really talking about is he leads me in the right paths of righteousness. He leads me in the right paths. That's what righteousness really means. It means right. It starts out with right. Jesus is directing this to people who assumed that they were right because of their own efforts to be right, that they made right choices, right selections, right decisions, that they did the right things. If they had worked for NASA, what would they be? The right stuff. The right stuff. But when I began to learn about the nature of spirituality, spiritual things, and righteousness, that rightness, being right with God, we talk about being right with God. God and I are right. We're okay. There's nothing between me and God. We're okay. We're right. Righteousness, right. That righteousness, Paul teaches very clearly. He uses another technical word. He says it's imputed to us. I'm not righteous until God gives me righteousness. I'm not right until He makes me right. But there were some, especially among the religious leaders of Jesus' day, who thought they were right because of their own rightness. He has a parable here. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The King James Version gives us the term which sticks, the publican. Publican. We would use the publican as a public servant. They did lots of different things other than just collecting taxes. They recorded deeds. They signed papers. They kept records. They kept minutes. They were a public servant for Rome. And publicans. They were notaries republic, I guess. Two men, a Pharisee. Now the Pharisees were a religious sect, and it has been our inclination, I think, in modern times, to think of the Pharisees as a group of very bad people. And the Pharisees were sinners, and they had some problems. But if you had ever met a Pharisee, you might like them. They were not evil or wicked people. What made them wicked was that they were working so hard to be right, and they were not doing what they on their own. In their own energy, in their own power. Paul would describe it as trying to be right with God, or thinking they were right with God, out of the flesh. I have kept all the rules. I have obeyed all the commandments. I have made correct decisions. My faith is orthodox. I'm in line with the traditions and teachings of the rabbis. I'm righteous. A publican was someone, almost always, who was a native to an area. Here in Israel, it would almost always be a Jewish person. Someone who knew the people. It needed to be someone who knew the customs, who knew the economy, who knew business. Someone would be selected who was already in the business world and understood trade and commerce and monetization. But it was also the kind of person who probably early in their childhood had already discovered that they were the kind of person that no one else liked. That happens. I hope that you don't like people and don't like other people. I hope that you're not the kind of person who goes around not liking people. That's very childish. It's very immature to decide you don't like someone. Liking someone. Very immature, very childish. But I have seen people more socially awkward than even myself. I was socially awkward and shy and bashful and backward, and yet I was very fortunate is that for the most part, people liked me. And I knew, even as a child, that it wasn't because of anything that I had done or who I was, or I guess I would tell you, I don't know. But there were people in my class, as I went through classes and went through grades, there were some children who the rest of the class didn't seem to like. They seemed to have a disease. You know what it was? Cooties. It was cooties. Do they still have cooties at your school, Addison? You don't have cooties? Good. Maybe there was a vaccine for it. I don't know. Do you know how to get rid of cooties? You wipe them on somebody else. You give them your cooties. When you touch them, now they have your cooties. Do you know back in the 60s? Now, I haven't added Mr. Potato Head to the prayer list, but he has undergone a lot of social dramatization recently. Do you know that when I had Mr. Potato Head, do you know what he was? He was a real potato. And you would buy a little plastic bag full of noses and eyes and ears and a little hat. And you stick them in a potato. Now later on, about when my children were born, they had a plastic thing. It was really this kind of size, like when Terry goes to a restaurant, she would say, "Yeah, that's a potato right there. That's what I want." But he kind of opened his hind quarters, had a little drawer back there, an odd design, but anyway, it worked. And inside Mr. Potato Head were all the noses, eyebrows, and glasses, and lips and things. And it already had little pre-drilled holes, plastic, and you plug them in. They also had one called cooties. And it was like a little cylinder, and you could plug legs into it. As many legs and a tail and eyes and ears or wings. It never really caught on. But I imagine if you still have one, or yeah, you could probably be very wealthy. But I think if you went to eBay and decide you just find you one and buy you a cootie, you might find out maybe you can't afford it. Publicans didn't just take a job and then suddenly find themselves to be social pariahs. They took this job because they probably decided, well, nobody likes me anyway, I might as well get paid for it. And what made taxpayers despicable people most often is that they could charge anything that they wanted to for their services. They could charge anything that they wanted to for taxes. And they had almost every publican had a group of Roman soldiers that guarded them. They always carried around other people's money. I don't know why they called him a publican. It kind of sounds like a Democrat to me, carrying around other people's money. But they would charge a lot of money, and they became wealthy. They didn't just make a living, they became wealthy. Because, and everybody that they knew that they were doing that, and so they were despised. Jesus said these two kinds of people came to the temple to pray. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, "God, I thank you that I'm not like other people." Please pay close attention. If you ever pray that prayer, you're on the wrong track. Thank you that I'm not like other people. Thank you that I'm better than other people. You might even say, thank you that I'm more blessed, or that I'm up here in some way, and they're down there. Thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers. The Pharisee was none of those things. He didn't spit on the sidewalk. He didn't scratch his head in public. He had good table manners. Or even as this tax collector, I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. From what? From everybody and everything. He was by himself. He would not even look up into heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So Jesus has created this picture. Jesus says this, he draws a line under that story and says, I tell you that this man, the publican, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Something began to happen in our world and in our country back in the mid to late 1800s. It came to be known as the Industrial Revolution. If you ever watch Ancient Aliens on Friday, you know exactly where all those ideas came from. And when that spaceship crashed in Roswell in 1947, that really, really took off then because we began to use alien technology. I'm kidding. But what? Now, things needed to be made. Work needed to be done. Products needed to be produced. There needed to be commerce and trade, and the market had to be filled. What was the primary social construct for getting all of that done in the mid-1800s? You know? Slavery. Slavery. Have somebody do it. And it had fallen out of fashion. I'm going to say something that's very unpolitic and maybe might even be offensive to some, but there are people in our world today who believe that there needs to be some kind of recompense because our country once supported the culture of slavery. Do you know how many thousands and thousands of Union soldiers gave their lives, who died horrible, terrible deaths in the Civil War in order to defeat the idea of slavery? Thousands, thousands and thousands. That's a pretty good payment right there, I think. I think that, and I'm not in that culture. I don't see things. That's not from my world. But when I've been taught and I've come to believe that when you pay with blood, that's about the best currency. That's the most valuable currency. When you pay with your life, to suggest that other kind of recompense also would be necessary. There are people who believe that, yes, Jesus died for me, but what has he done for me lately? I've told people Jesus died for you, and they say, well, I didn't ask him to. Yeah, well, that's right. He didn't. He didn't ask you to die for him, but he did. The New Testament says he paid for us. He redeemed us. And the word redeemed was a word, it was to describe the purchase of a slave, not to transfer his ownership from one person to another. A person that's redeemed is, I paid, you were on the slavery block, I bought you, and now you're no longer a slave. It's not that you're my slave. Paul chose to consider himself to be a slave of Jesus Christ. But when Jesus was talking to his disciples, he says, you call me Master and Lord. And he says, and so I am. But he says, let me tell you what, we're friends. Greater love hath no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. Are you familiar with that line in the Battle Hymn of the Republic? I'm not a big Confederate fan. I've never been compelled to fly the Confederate flag. I don't want to pull down Confederate statues. That seems like nonsense. I think we still need those reminders around. This is somebody that used to be one of our great leaders. And he also founded the Ku Klux Klan. Let's keep his statue up. We don't need to be forgetting that. In the Battle Hymn of the Republic, one of the lines, that's a song sung and marched to by the federal government, army, the federal army, the army of the United States that fought against slavery during the Civil War. In that song it says, as he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. Now, you just believe and feel and claim any way and anything that you want to. But when I find out that someone's died for me, I never think that they owe me anything else. Slavery was gone. And so people did what they should have done all along. They began to think, how can we get this job done without slaves? And they began to build ways to pick cotton and to gin cotton. There's a TikTok out where someone says, Alexis, remind me to go to the gym. And Alexa says, I'm putting gin on your shopping list. And she says, okay. Okay. That's all right. Now I have gin on my shopping list. That's not what a cotton gin is. I've sat in cotton gins waiting for the cotton to be ginned. And I wish that somebody had taken me out to the lobby, taken me, now this is what ginning cotton looks like, but I don't think they let you. It was dangerous. Used to just be spinning cylinders. One was a hollow cylinder and it had slots in it. And they would fill that with cotton and cotton bolls. The other one had nails sticking out of it. And when they spun in opposite directions, that cotton would be rolled around inside that drum, and the nails would slip into those slots. And as they spun like that, just the head of the nail would slip in, and when it came out, guess what it had hanging on it? It'd pull that cotton out, but the slots were too narrow for stems and seeds and such. And people began to put together, in the beginning of the 20th century, people were manufacturing all different kinds of things in lines, distribution lines. They would make, I put this screw in and hand it to you, or it would go down the conveyor belt. And then someone else would pick it up and screw something onto it. And when it got to the end of the line, guess what? It was done. They would have an engine like coming along on a chain, and there would be people on both sides going brrr, brrr, and rat, rat, rat. And when it got down to the end of the line, it was ready to just drop into a car. It was an engine. All the pieces and parts had been done. Something happened, and this got into the church, and we found out, well, you know, we can make Christians just like that. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit, some of that, this. And so what was happening is, you see, the Pharisee, he believed that if I do this, I'm right with God. The publican said, what can I do to be right with God? And his conclusion was, I'm going to need mercy. I'm going to need mercy. There's not anything I can do to fix this life. But the Pharisee believed in this conveyor belt or this construction type, and we have added it. You just kind of go to a bookstore, look at magazine articles. Here are the 7 traits of highly successful people. Someone was trying to teach a little boy in school. It said, no, it's I before E except after C. I before E except after C. He said, well, you know what? Einstein got it wrong twice, and he was a genius. Lots of rules don't add up. You know that people thought Albert Einstein, that he was mentally deficient, I don't think he even said a single word. He was about 6 or 7 years of age. When he started talking, he failed grades and didn't make good grades. It just didn't seem like he was ever going to make it. And then he thought up the theory of relativity. Here are the 4 spiritual laws. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here are the steps, and that we put them in our bulletins. We preach them in our sermons. Here are the 3 things you need to do to become a Christian. 1, 2, 3. But that's not what the Bible teaches about salvation. It is a relationship with God. If you look in the King James Version in this story, the gospel writer said he spoke with himself, or he prayed thus to himself. He was praying to himself. This man was talking to God. It's a big difference. We've told people you can walk an aisle, kneel at the altar, recite this prayer, raise your hand, sign a card, join the church, be baptized, bang, you got it. But, you know, we talk a lot about things, having knowledge and information and the correct data. And so we began talking about whether or not you know the Lord. I know the Lord. Do you know the Lord? Do you know Jesus? In John's Gospel, chapter 10, Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. That sounds odd, doesn't it? My sheep hear my voice because they know me, and they follow me. He said, no. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them. Do you know, Jesus even said this horrifying thing. He says on Judgment Day, there are going to be people who stand in front of him on Judgment Day. And you know what? They're going to say, oh, number 1, I preached. Number 2, I sang. Number 3, I cast out demons. And he had a list of 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you know what Jesus said? That on that day, Jesus is going to say to a lot of people,
depart from me, I never knew you.
I never knew you. I never knew you. It's not that you didn't know me. Jesus said, I didn't know you. We didn't have a relationship. I've been doing this minister thing for over 50 years, and I've seen lots of people check things off. I've done that, done that, done that, done that. I've got to, and you're going to take that list to heaven with you one day, and you're going to say, you're going to say, God, here's my list. I got everything checked. I never knew you. Never knew you. You never got to this. You were this kind of person. You were checking things off. That's what he was doing. I fast 2 times a day. I smiled at him. I winked 2 times. You know, that's what he's saying. I tithe, and I'm here at the temple. I'm praying. And we're telling people that. We began telling them it's just like putting something together. It's like an assembly line. Checking everything off. Because if you got all the boxes checked, when you get down to the end of the assembly line, there it is, you got it. It works. It's an engine. It's a car. It's a sewing machine. But it's not always. We've started telling people how many people over the years that I have baptized that they don't even attend church anywhere now. They don't read their Bible or pray. I guess if someone asked them, are you a Christian? They probably would say, oh yes. And that's really the big danger, you see right there. So they say, oh yes. What makes you believe that you're a Christian? Well, I used to attend Sunday school. I've read my Bible. I said the sinner's prayer. I signed a card. I was baptized. I'm a member of my home church. That's what the Pharisees do. See, I've got a list here. He was only mentioning, out of humility, he was only mentioning part of the list. Back in the 70s, 1970s, a man named George Fitzer wrote a book called The McDonaldization of Society. The McDonaldization of Society. And just a few years ago, back in the late 90s, a man named John Drain wrote The McDonaldization of the Church. Do you know what the primary focus for the Kroc brothers was? It's the McDonald brothers. I can't remember what Kroc's first name was.
Ray.
Was it Ray? Ray Kroc. I believe you're right. Ray Kroc. There was just one McDonald's, and he bought it, and these guys thought, ha ha ha, what a sucker. This guy bought a hamburger joint. You know what Ray Kroc told those brothers? People will never forget the name McDonald's. Boy, was he true to his word. And so he came in and he used that little McDonald's that he had bought as kind of like a testing ground. And he came up with a way. And you know what his primary strategy was? He'd make a hamburger, and then he would teach someone how to make that hamburger. And he would say, you make it like this, 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 that, and that, and then you're done. If I ever catch you making it in a different way, I'm going to fire you. And so he began putting together franchises. This is where we get our potatoes. They became Idaho russet potatoes. And he says, we're going to use only russet potatoes, and we shred them just like this, and we fry them just like that, this temperature for this many minutes. And it really doesn't, a lot of that really doesn't matter. Do you know really what really makes it taste good? Salt. And they just had burgers, fries, and soda. They didn't even have milkshakes. And so he would say, I want to sell you the franchise. Well, you'll be the owner of your McDonald's. But here's the contract, and you've got to do everything. All of your equipment has to be bought from me. All of your employees have to be trained, because when someone goes to your McDonald's, I want them to be able to get the very same identical exact hamburger that they're getting at my McDonald's. And then they began to sell franchises. And you can go to McDonald's around the world right now, and when you order a Big Mac, it is 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, onions, pickles on a sesame seed bun. Wherever you go. I used to be able to say that faster. And we began to realize that we could, in the church, we could drive our numbers up. We could bring more people in. And in every church, they were saying, this is the way to become a Christian. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the way we want to enroll you in Sunday school. We're going to get you in this mission program. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we began to work on the altar call, the invitations. And we began to stylize it so that it had a psychological effect on everyone, that if you needed to come down the aisle during any church service and you didn't come down the aisle, you would leave feeling badly. We've McDonaldized the church so that we're, you know, when Matthew was describing the way Jesus talked to the Pharisees, he says, you guys are great soul winners. You turn over heaven and earth to get a convert. He says, you'll do anything in order to convert people, to save people, to lead them to salvation. And then Jesus concluded that statement. Do you know what he said you do next? You turn them in 10 times the children of hell that you are yourselves. There was that campaign back in the 50s that Southern Baptists call a million more in 54. And we were going to do everything in our power to enroll 54 million people in Sunday school. We succeeded almost. I think we did about 48 million. But the thing was, there were more people coming to Southern Baptist churches, more baptisms, more people in Sunday school. And I remember reading what Vance Havner said. He says, if we get 1 million more like we did in 54, he says, we're sunk. Because we filled our churches with lost people. Lost people became our teachers. Lost people became our board of directors and board members. Lost people were ordained as deacons. Lost people began preaching the gospel. We licensed them and ordained them. And our churches were filled with lost people. People not even saved, that God never had convicted. People like the Pharisees. And Jesus knew that the greatest danger was that the Pharisees thought that they were going to heaven. He told them over, and he told them in that passage, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, none of you will ever see the kingdom of God. That is tragic. That is tragic. And so I try very diligently not to tell people, how do I become a Christian? You need to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. You know, the Bible talks about the way of salvation or the way to God. You know what Jesus said the way was? Was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. Jesus doesn't know the way. He doesn't show us the way. He doesn't lead us down the way. He is the way. And knowing him, having him know us, having a relationship with him. Jesus told him that day, he said, that Pharisee went to his home justified. Why? Because he was in the temple? No. Why? Because he prayed the sinner's prayer? No. He was just talking with God, and God was hearing. It didn't say he was baptized. It didn't say that he was circumcised. It didn't say that he was Jewish. There's just a lot of things. But he says this, he probably didn't have even a small fraction of all the good works that the Pharisee had. But he says this man was right with God. All right, you think about that. You think about that. Join us for worship in just a little while. Thank you.